Everybody, as I said off the top, we are down to 4 teams in the NCAA basketball tournament. We all look forward to this, but then it gets to the Final Four very, very quickly. These 3 weeks go fast. So joining me, someone that knows much, much more about college basketball than I do. That is Blake Lovell. Check him out over at the Southeastern 14, and he has an NFL podcast as well, Established the Pass. And Blake, how you doing? I'm sure this is a tiring couple of weeks for you with the tournament going on, covering all these games. But I appreciate you coming on and help break it down for us.
Yeah, no, you got it, Phillip. I mean, it is like sometimes the SEC's kind of been left out of this thing a little bit, and so we're maybe always kind of a drought it seems at times with the SEC in the Final Four, but yeah, picks back up with Alabama in a nice spot here. I don't know if nice is necessarily. It's nice to be in the Final Four. Probably drawing UConn doesn't feel as nice, but nonetheless, yeah, get the tide here. And of course, Tennessee just came up a little bit short, but we'll see what happens. I mean, no one thought NC State could win 9 games in a row that were all elimination games to get here. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, they've been playing tournament basketball a lot longer than everybody else has. The
Yeah.
survive and advance mantra started at the ACC tournament for them. I mean, yeah, all these teams played in conference tournaments, but it wasn't lose or go home for them. So it's an interesting deal how they're really battle tested coming into this thing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think I saw someone, maybe an Evan Maya, put out the percentages. I think it was like I want to say it was like a less than 1% chance that they could win 9 games in a row. And I think he had like the individual percentages of each of the games. And like there were, I want to say that 4 or 5 of them were like 25% or lower, like chance just to win that individual game. And so you combine that all together into 9 games, it's unthinkable that they've done this. I mean, and so, yeah, but that's what we always say, right? It's the teams that get hot at the right time. And I think that's what's interesting about Alabama, too. It's like, let's not forget, I mean, this team was not playing well entering the NCAA tournament. Like, they were not playing well at all. Lost, 3 of their last 5 in the regular season, got beat 102-88 to Florida in the SEC tournament. And now here they are. And I think that's what's fascinating to me is sometimes we try to figure out who has the advantage, the teams that play the furthest in the conference tournament or the teams that get knocked out early and maybe save your legs a little bit. And, it's like, okay, Auburn goes all the way, wins the SEC tournament, but somehow they lose to Yale, right? Alabama gets knocked out early. Somehow they make this run. And then it's like, well, we throw all that out the window because NC State just won the entire ACC tournament. And now they've made an improbable run to the Final Four. So who knows? It's just random. But, yeah, that's the way it works. So.
And normally if you just looked at the seeds, and for the question about to ask, and I do this a lot, I know in college football when we get to the 14th, always if I have somebody on the breakdown, I say, who's your biggest surprise to be here? And if you look on paper, you're like, it's got to be NC State. But like you said, Alabama was not playing well. I mean, we all would expect, I think, Purdue and UConn. Those are simple.
No.
You see those 2 teams, okay, they're in the Final Four. But like I said, Alabama was not playing well. They were 5-5. Coming into this thing, like I said, 2 losses to Florida, an overtime win against Florida. I guess they're probably glad it didn't match up with Florida in the tournament.
Yeah.
That was just not their. And then they had another overtime win. I think it was against Arkansas. And then you look at NC State, like you said, they would not have been in had they not won SEC tournament. So I guess I can ask this question: who really is the bigger surprise getting here?
Well, I mean, again, probably just from the numbers, it's NC State. But I think what I thought about that was the South. Yeah. So like what I thought about that region was, you had 2 teams in Houston and Marquette, the top 2 seeds. They had entered as, Houston, we knew injury issues, so the depth issues, and obviously Jamal Shed gets injured, and that just completely changed their fortunes against Duke. But, you had Colette come in with Marquette, who was, I mean, he ended up playing, I guess, but, like, you felt like that Marquette team was still missing a little something to make that true. They weren't upset proof, I guess you could say. And so when you looked at it, and then of course Kentucky gets bounced in game number 1 against Oakland, and so your top 3 seeds, you're looking at them and thinking, wow, like, just you're questioning the top 3 seeds. And so if you go beyond that, you're like, all right, well now the path opens up for a run like this. And I mean, I thought Duke would beat NC State. I thought it was a situation where, all right, maybe the run kind of ends here. Duke's the 4 seed, they make it happen, but still, yeah, it again, just the probability tells you that NC State was impossible for them to do this, and they did it. But again, you talk about Alabama. I said I picked Alabama to make the Elite Eight in my bracket, and the reason I did was because I also picked Michigan State to beat North Carolina, and I thought Alabama matches up much better with Michigan State than they do with North Carolina because they've struggled against some of those like high-powered offensive teams this year. And yet, they still managed to win that game. And of course, yes, things open up a little bit better at the bottom where you have Clemson coming out of it versus an Arizona or a Baylor or whatever. But, that was a team that already beaten Alabama once this season. And you're wondering, is this going to happen again? Are they going to lock them down on 3 like Clemson did against Baylor and Arizona to get there? So, it's kind of wild that these are the two teams that ultimately made it out of their respective regions because there were a lot of things going against them coming into the NCAA tournament. And even though one was an 11, one was a 4, both felt like they were just kind of in a situation where NC State can't possibly keep this going. Alabama, can they ever figure out, are they really going to be able to figure out these issues that aren't just going to beat them and end their season? So.
Well, you had a lot more faith in the Crimson Tide than I did. I had them losing in the first weekend. I had them beating Charleston, but I assumed they would meet up with St. Mary's in the next round, not Grand Canyon, and which Grand Canyon did give them a decent game there. But I had St. Mary's knocking out Alabama just because I watched those St. Mary's Gonzaga matchups at 9-10 o'clock to come on, and I'm impressed with how that team's always good too. And so you were a little bit more faithful with Alabama than I was. So I'm probably just, all the fans that holler Roll Tide at me, y'all can hit me up at P. Jordan SEC. I know I was wrong. It's not the first time, not the last time. But what have you seen? We talked about, again, the 5-5, how Alabama came into this. What have you seen different with the Crimson Tide, the way they ended the regular season in the tournament and how they played in this tournament?
Yeah, I think you have to put like the numbers in perspective here sometimes because you are talking about a team that we're not looking at Alabama like they're a defensive juggernaut. We shouldn't look at Alabama like they're Tennessee or UConn or teams like that. Even Mississippi, like an SEC example, Mississippi State, they were a top 10 defensive team. But they've actually gotten better defensively. And I know people are going to say, well, they gave up 96 to Charleston, 87 to Carolina, 82 to Clemson. But I think you have to remember that when Alabama plays a style to where they're going to give up points, even like good defensive teams are still going to probably give up some points in this particular Alabama style. Now, last year was different, right? That team was built on defense, where you had one of the best defensive teams in the country, and that was their strength, is that they weren't going to give up many points. But this year's team was built on offense, and there's no question about it. They were built to score, and score some more. And you knew they were going to give up points. I can remember back to last June. I'm saying I don't know that I've seen an SEC team going into a season where their weakness is as clear as Alabama's, where it's just I don't know how they're going to play defense. And, ultimately, we got through what they were 6-5. And I remember saying this, and everybody knows what I'm going to say if you've listened to anything I've done this season, because it's the one time I guess I can pat myself on the back and say, at least I got something right about this. But I'm like, I know they're 6-5 after they lost that game to Arizona in December, but I said, I see the way this team plays offense, and they're just going to go outscore people this year. Like the rest of the way, when they get an SEC play where you get some teams trying to play grinded out styles and all, Alabama's just going to outscore them. And that kind of is what happened, was you just saw them, the team that Alabama struggled the most against this year were the teams that could score just as well as they could. But the teams that tried to grind it out and do all this other stuff, they had no chance against Alabama because they couldn't keep up scoring-wise. And so I think the defense has been much better in this tournament. Throw out the 96 against Charleston. That game was over with 10 minutes to go in the second half. Alabama was up 30. I don't care that Charleston finished, with 29 points or whatever in the final 10 minutes. It didn't matter. But you look at like the 61 against Grand Canyon. That's a team that really needed to get to the free throw line to score. And that was really the only path they had. Alabama knew that, and they were able to defend well enough to hold them to 61 points. Carolina, giving up only 87 to Carolina as a below-average defensive team like Alabama, that's fine. You'll take that. Clemson, you knew we were going to hit some shots. And so they have put in a lot more on the defensive end. And the other thing, Phillip, I think has been very clear, they have just had so many guys step up around Mark Sears. They've had the Grant Nelson game. They've had the Jaron Stevenson game. Griffin's made a ton of plays. Estrada's made a ton of plays. Nick Pringle's made a ton of plays. And you just keep going down the line. That's what's been most impressive is they've just been able to have different guys step up, and that's been the big difference too. It's not just been a one-man thing to where Sears has had to do it all. And there weren't many times necessarily he had to do that this season. There were guys who stepped up, but really the defensive end has been the biggest part of this. And so yeah, they've turned things around, and that's why they're here in the spot.
And then we just saw, you talk about this offense being the catalyst of this team. Mark Sears, I mean, the game is Clemson, 26-13, and I'm looking up, at the score, and they got the stat that says Alabama was 1 of 12 from three. I'm like, okay, is this
Right.
because that's the thing with Alabama? If they have a bad shooting night from three, they're
Yep.
pretty much toast because that's where majority of their offense is going
Yep.
to come from. And then they got on fire. I mean, it seemed like at that point they had so many open threes in the corner, Blake. I was like, okay, they just can't make these. And then all of a
Yep.
sudden, talk about Stevenson, he makes a couple of them, and then he had 19 points. He was 6 or 7 for three in the game. So just the way they can just flip the switch and just come back in a hurry. And then you look at the second half. Every time Clemson tried to make a run, Alabama just would respond with another three. It's just, and like you said, they got so many guys that can contribute from that spot.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, right? And that's and I said this to someone, I'm like, no one is going to really give Alabama a chance in this game against UConn. And I understand because UConn is just, they are a juggernaut, the likes of which we've not seen in a while. I mean, even going back to the back-to-back Florida teams, right? Even the back-to-back Florida teams in the mid that they weren't beating teams like this. Like they weren't just going out and obliterating their opponent the way that UConn is doing right now. And so, by the way, not to say that I'm saying these team could be better than the back-to-back Florida teams, because I still think those teams were just completely special to the point that I haven't seen another group like that. But if you look at this and you're thinking, craft me the perfect plan to beat a team like UConn, I don't know that there is a perfect plan. You look at the three losses they've had this year. They lost 69-65 to Kansas, 75-60 to Seton Hall, 85-66 to Creighton. The one common theme there is that UConn struggled to score in those three games, 60, 65, 66. So the perfect game plan is for Alabama to play defense the way that they played to this point. But here's what Alabama has that those three teams did not have. And don't get me wrong, a couple good offensive teams in there, Kansas and Creighton. But what this team has is a three-point element, volume-wise, that you do not see very often. And so Alabama may put up 45 threes in this game. I think they should put up 45 threes in this game because I think that is your best path to being able to pull this off, knowing that, again, could they have some of those defensive issues come up and they're not perfect. They struggle to defend UConn in the half court, which, by the way, remember that too. UConn wants this to be a half court game. Alabama wants this thing to go up and down, up and down, up and down. And so I think that's what's going to really be interesting here. And it's why I think in the right circumstance, I am willing to give Alabama much more of a chance than anyone else is going to, because you do not see people play offense the way that Alabama plays offense every single time. UConn has not seen that yet. And if you get a situation where Alabama is able to get the shots they want and put up 40-plus threes, which we just saw them go, 16-40 against Clemson or something like that, 16-36. They've always got a chance when they do that. And so that's why I think they have a chance to really make this interesting, because it's like you said, they just have, they have so many guys who can step out and make a three. And if you're trading twos for threes or ones for threes, well, the numbers tell you Alabama's got an advantage there. And so, yeah, I don't hate this as much as some people do, I think. I really believe, like I said earlier, this is going to have a chance to be closer. Now, I say that if Alabama comes out and starts 1 of 13 from three against UConn, they're going to get beat by 25 or more probably. That's the worry, right? And so that's what it's going to come down to. But for Alabama, it's worked out pretty well this year. If it's just a matter of, hey, can you make your threes? Because they've done that. So
I know, and the scary thing about UConn, they were like 3 for 17 against Illinois from three, and they still and Blake, and this is a little behind the scenes. That game went to halftime at 28-23. UConn's up. I said, okay, I'm going to go in the kitchen and fix me some supper. I come back and it's like a 15. I'm like, what happened? I started right when halftime started. Just go on a 30-0 run like that. And the thing too with UConn, you mentioned up and down. Somebody was asking me about it. And I said, Alabama's going to make a track meet. Basically, it's got to be a high scoring up and down game for them to have a shot here. Because I feel like Alabama's weakness, we saw it during the SEC play. If you do have capable bigs, and it
Yeah.
is that slower game. I mean, Auburn gave him trouble. I mean, it's an example of a team which is not Broome. With Klingon, if he's able to get his game going and everything they got around him, that
Yeah.
kind of is where Alabama's weakness is. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, I completely. And look, I said, UConn hasn't seen a team like Alabama. Now, I know there will be people point out that'll say, well, Illinois was actually the number one offensive team in Ken Palm's efficiency numbers heading into that game, and now they're number four based on what they did in that one. So that dropped them back a little bit. But I think the difference between Alabama and Illinois is you're talking about an Alabama team that does rely way more on the three and shoots it at a better rate than Illinois did. And so I think that is the key difference there. But like you said, it's just if UConn, if there was any team in the country, you could put them against anybody out there, Alabama, whoever, and you just let UConn execute their offensive game plan in the half court. There's nobody stopping them. Like, the way they're playing right now, I don't see a situation where you have a lot of teams who are going to be able to stop them. And I really wonder what this is going to look like from Alabama's perspective defensively as they're trying to guard Klingon, as they're trying to guard, what exactly this UConn team wants to do. Because remember, like we said, and this is what I find so fascinating, is, UConn's not giving up more than 58 points in this tournament.
Mm-hmm.
52 to Stetson, 52 to San Diego State, 52 against what was the best offensive team in the country, most efficient offensive team in the country. They gave up only 52 against, and they gave up 58 to Northwestern. So that's where this one is like, are they just due to give up some points here? Because St. John scored 90 on them in the Big East tournament. Is this going to be one of those kind of games where, hey, let's try to find the Rick Pitino model here, which again, they're going to play up and down, and that's what they did, this season against UConn. But it's got to be that kind of scenario where you just have a team that comes out. I think St. John's hit 10 threes in that game, so shot it pretty well. They got a lot of offensive rebounds, and that was something I found that was pretty interesting looking back at that game. And we know, like for Alabama, that's a team where if you are shooting as many threes as you are, there's going to be the chance for those long rebounds on the offensive side, and they've done a pretty good job this year getting offensive rebounds. So that's something else to keep an eye on here. But look, if early on, you get a situation where one of their front court guys like a Nelson or Stevenson or, whoever, right, Pringle gets in foul trouble, things become much more challenging just based on how you have to guard UConn. So,
speaking of foul trouble, that's a good segue to the other game because that's the biggest. I think that's the biggest battle against Purdue with Edey.
oh yeah,
It's foul trouble. I mean, Tennessee got it. I mean, and the thing is with Edey is really impressive with him. He doesn't really get a lot of fouls called on him. I mean, he pretty much stays out of foul trouble.
Trust me,
but
Tennessee fans will agree with you there. They're not exactly thrilled with that, but yes.
Yeah. They were the fans that were Tennessee fans that were there on Sunday were vocal. I think there was a very sarcastic cheers when he got his first foul call late there in the game, and of course the talent around him. Braden Smith, one of them. His number two, basically. I think every great big man needs a number two as that guard. Really, they remind me of like a throwback from '90s NBA, like the Rockets or a team like that. But anyways, but NC State's got a big man of their own. It's the DJ show, really, with NC State, DJ Horn and DJ Burns. But DJ Burns, great game against Duke, 29 points in that one. Just looking at this, what's the key here to you with NC State? We talked about this being the Cinderella story, the surprise team for them to upset Purdue. Is it just stay out of foul trouble? What's the key in your mind?
Yeah, that's like much easier said than done, right? And I think that's what it comes down to, because when you look at just the volume of free throw attempts that Edey's had this season, I just don't know how you do it. How do you stay out of foul trouble? Because it just has not happened very often for anyone this season. And I think that is the big concern here for NC State, knowing that this is kind of a team where, I mean, you kind of know who they're playing at this point, right? You kind of look at this run and you see what Kevin Keats has done. They're pretty much a 6 to 7 guy rotation. And you've got Burns, you've got Mo Diarra, who, of course, came over from Missouri, played there last year. But this is the kind of game where I would just be, if I'm NC State, I would be a little worried, because knowing that those are the two guys who are going to have to put, and of course they got Middlebrooks too, who's another 6'10 guy. So they've got basically 3 6'10 guys they can throw at him. And obviously Burns getting physical with Edey is going to be very important in this game, because that's the thing, right? You can flip it the other way and say, what happens if one of these guys, what if Burns gets Zach Edey in foul trouble, which has not happened very often? How much does that change what Purdue can do? Because I think outside of that, you mentioned Smith. Yeah, they've got him. But outside of that, what are they going to do offensively if he's not on the floor? It completely changes everything they want to do. So that's what I'm really curious to see, how Kevin Keatts kind of puts this game plan together, knowing that NC State's a team that is pretty aggressive. Like, they're not a team like an Alabama who's going to shoot a lot of threes. I think it was they get 53.5% of their points from two. That's top 100 nationally. So they really like to get the ball and score inside the arc, which that's also the question. I mean, Tennessee did too, right? And it's like, but when you know Edey's standing in there and you know how challenging it's going to be to even pull a rebound if you do miss a shot because he's going to snag it, it's hard. It's hard to know what the right game plan is from that standpoint. But it's the same kind of thing. Tennessee wanted to get up and down the floor, not make this just a half-court game. NC State wants to get up and down the floor. I don't think they want to just do this in the half court, because that's not the path to success by any means. And so, I think that's what it comes down to. You need some easy transition points, and you've got to keep your big guys out of foul trouble, because, it's like you look at the numbers, like for a Tennessee, Adu, just 2 bad games this year against Purdue. And then it's like Awaka also fouls out. And they're just, you're having to keep going down the line, and knowing this is an NC State team that really does, like I said, rely on kind of this same group. It's a pretty predictable rotation where it's going to be 7 guys. Somebody gets in foul trouble. What happens? And I just don't think you can afford that against Purdue. But the problem is, how do you avoid it? I don't know how. And so that's the big problem for NC State here. I don't know how they're able to keep Zach Edey from dominating this game, because a lot of other teams haven't been able to do it either. But this just feels like a matchup where it's not in NC State's favor.
Yeah, and obviously Purdue is on their Virginia redemption tour here
right.
after getting. I'm sorry, Auburn fans, for mentioning Virginia. I know that's 2019 is still a sore subject, but still, it's kind of interesting. And I look at Burns too as this. He seems like to me he does have the kind of body type. If he is on Edey, maybe he can be a little bit physical with him without fouling, and kind of not let Edey get where he wants to get, because obviously when you watch him play, he's got spots on the floor where he wants to get. There's certain sides, or how close he wants to be to the basket. If you can consistently push him maybe out, get him out of his comfort zone a little bit, I could, frustrate him. And then what happens when a big guy usually gets frustrated? On the other side, he starts committing fouls. So I don't know. Maybe NC State needs to get the psychological game going on here.
Well, Tennessee tried that. I mean, even like they brought in J.P. Estrella, who, has not played a ton, but that's because Edey was in foul trouble, and, he had other guys. Like, he was physical with Edey. I mean, it's a mismatch, but he was bumping him around. You could tell he wasn't thrilled about it. So Burns is a much bigger guy, and so I think that's where, like you said, you just body him on every single play, and that's going to frustrate him because he's not used to that, especially with a guy like that with the size that Burns has. So, that's, as always, like, this is what I love about the Final Four when you get these kind of matchups. Is like, I want to know what the coaches are thinking right now. Like, what have they identified to where they see, ooh, that's where we can exploit that. Like, we have found the weakness, or we have found this one area that nobody else is seeing. How do we take advantage of that? That's what I always find interesting in these games.
And if the favorites win, we'll get a matchup of 2 7'4" centers. So that will be a fun part. But as we know, this tournament never goes how you expect to go. Kept a few minutes over. You got one more. You got time for an Auburn question?
Oh yeah, I'm fine.
All right. So the Auburn Tigers, and again, disappointment. This was a team, and we mentioned off the top, a team that went through the SEC tournament, won it. I mean, look, you can also look at it. They were very fortunate that Tennessee and Kentucky gets knocked out. So, it does kind of help a little bit, especially they would have matched up with Tennessee there in the semifinals. But still, they haven't made it past the first weekend since 2019. They get knocked out against Yale in the first round, last 2 years, second round. What has been the biggest issue for this team, and where does Bruce Pearl need to take this team? Where does he need to improve this team to get them past? Because we know every year he has the talent.
Yeah. Well, I think a pretty common theme for the good teams he's had. They've been great defensively, and I think that's always helpful. And I think sometimes they're a little underrated offensively. It feels like because they've had to do it in a different way the past several years versus the Final Four team. And I think that to me is the one thing I would say is the year they go to the Final Four, they were as good as anybody in what category? They were shooting the
Shooting.
ball as well as anybody out there.
Mm-hmm.
And this year's team took a significant step forward. They shot at 35% this year from three. But like you look at the teams before that, right? 31.5%, 31.8%, 32.6%, 30.6%. So I think that's what, you think about watching Jared Harper and Bryce Brown and all those guys kind of being able to make big shots from three. And I think, look, I mean, I hate to do this, but it's like look at the Alabama example, right? I mean, Alabama, look, you mentioned earlier, it's like they have multiple guys who can step out and hit threes, and I think that's what I would like to see, like from Bruce Pearl, like building a team like that again, because it felt like that was more along the lines of how his teams used to play, right? Even go back to some of the Tennessee teams. I mean, not all of them. The year they got to the Elite Eight at Tennessee, they weren't a great shooting team, but they had Chris Lofton, and so they had someone that just was an absolute, could just knock down shots from anywhere. And I think that's kind of what I find. And look, the randomness too just factors in, where sometimes you get the wrong draw and you just can't advance in the tournament. But I think that is one thing I'd love to see them prioritize guards who can shoot the ball. And I'm not to say they haven't, right? I mean, Denver Jones can make shots, Holloway's made shots, but I want to see how that continues to evolve. They took a step forward this year, like I said, but how do they now become like a top 25 3-point shooting team out there? Because as we've seen, that can make up for a lot of deficiencies. And again, I hate to use Alabama example with Auburn, but it's true. I mean, like we said, they're here not because they are very good defensively. It's just because they can overwhelm teams offensively. And sure, you love to have both. You want a balanced team that can do everything. But I think the way this game is played now, maybe you need more than just guys who sometimes, can't give you that next gear offensively. And I think, look, we've talked about their guard play in recent years too. I mean, they've had some good guards, but it is something where they've had big men though that are just special. But we always say guards win in March, and I feel like that's this year. It's kind of interesting, right? Because of the ED and going in and all. But they have good guards though. I mean, those teams also have good guards, and so, yeah. But I think that's it. I don't know that I read too much into it, other than the fact that it just happens when you get in the NCAA tournament. Sometimes you just get the wrong draw, you get upsets happen. But I'd love to see them continue that path of taking a huge jump. They jumped 200 spots in 3-point percentage this year. I'd love to see them continue forward as like a top 30 type 3-point shooting team, because I think that can make up for a lot of different things. So,
yeah, it'd be interesting. And it's look, we're focused on Alabama, but I just had to throw the Auburn stuff out there. Just as like once again another really good season. That's the sad thing that an SEC tournament championship season is always a good season to celebrate, but when you get knocked out first round and your in-state rival is in the Final Four, it doesn't make for a happy feeling at this point. Anyways, maybe a little bit. We get closer next season, everybody will look back at this year as a better year. But Blake, it's been fun. I told you 20. We've almost done 30 minutes. I always appreciate you come on. Whatever we're talking about, it's always a great conversation. But if people wanted to follow you online, where can they find you and all the work you're doing?
Yeah, I always appreciate it, Phillip. Yeah, if you want our SEC stuff, Southeastern 14 on YouTube, you can find us there. Yeah, covering it all. We'll be covering Alabama in the Final Four, of course, and yeah, lots of off-season basketball stuff. In addition to SEC football, baseball as well, of course, too. Yeah, everything else you can find me on Twitter at the Blake Lovell.
All right, sounds good, Blake. Once again, appreciate the time, and I look forward to talking again sometime down the road.
You got it, Phillip. Thanks, man.